Section 6 is going to cover a very basic text editor application. And the reason we do this is because we just talked about files in the last section. And so in order to work with a file, you're generally going to use an application, some application to work with that file. And almost every application uses very similar commands or skills or techniques to do things such as copying and pasting and highlighting, things of that nature. And so we're going to use this section and walk through this section as an exercise so that you learn some skills that really can apply to almost any application that you will use from here on out. But we're going to use a very simple basic text editor just to keep things simple. But again, it's really to instill the basic skills that you'll need for working with almost any application.
For this exercise, you can choose to use Windows or Linux. I'm going to use Windows. The reason I think this is important to go through some of these very basic skills and techniques is that they apply to all applications and across all operating systems. There are some slight differences, but for the most part, if you understand these basic techniques, you'll be able to use this in almost every application you work in. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to use the Notepad application. It's a very basic Windows application and it's been around for a long time. So if you go to Start and type in Notepad and enter, the Notepad application will open up. And here you can notice that you have a blinking cursor. Now, this vertical cursor up here, if I space over, you'll see the difference between the cursor and the mouse. So the mouse looks like a little eye, and I'm kind of moving it around. The cursor is the vertical line that's right there, and sometimes it'll be blinking. Okay, so the cursor will tell you where, when you start typing, where you're going to type. So that's why it's important to understand where your cursor is, because you want to make sure if you have a large document that you're typing where you're expecting to. So we're just going to type in, this is the first line. Okay, nothing too exciting there, but when we start working, the first thing you want to do is save the file. Once you get a little bit of work done, save it. So go up to File, and you'll see that there's some shortcut commands, and we'll go over these later, but for now we're just going to use the menu system. So go File and Save. And in this case, I'm going to save it under C, temp, and then I will give it a file name of file1.txt. Okay, now I provided the file extension here, but if I had left it off, since .txt is listed down here, it would append it automatically. If I have it appended already, it will just append it once. So hit save, and we see up here the file name, file1.txt. Okay, once we save the file and we have something to work with, let's take a look at the copy and paste functionality. So in order to copy and paste, or you perform an action on some text, you first have to select or highlight it. So again, you want to put your cursor wherever it is that you want to copy. So in this case, I'm going to copy the whole line. So I put the cursor first, I click the left, I move the mouse pointer to the beginning of the line, I click the left mouse button, and then I click and hold and drag, and then let go, and then the whole first line is selected. So that's the text I want to work with. So that's the first step. Now I want to copy. First of all, let me show you what happens if I cut it. If I cut it, it removes it, and then it will put it somewhere else, wherever I locate the cursor. So if I move down here and hit Control V, or let's go Edit, Paste, you'll see that I actually moved that line. If I do Control Z, it will undo. In contrast, I can copy it. So if I do Edit Copy, it just makes a copy of that line, and it'll leave that there. So now if I go hit the return to move to the next line, and I do an Edit Paste, now we have the line twice. Okay, and I just mentioned that if I take an action and then I want to undo it, I can use the Control Z functionality to do that. You'll also notice that undo is also in your menu. Undo, Control Z. Okay, now let's say we want to make the font different. So in Notepad, when you change the font, it changes all the font. In most applications, you would select what you want to change and then change the font, and only what you selected would change. But Notepad's a little bit different in that respect. But it still demonstrates things you can do with the font. So let's go to Format Font. As you can see, you can change the font style, and the size. So one of the fonts I've been using is Microsoft Sans Serif. I can make it bold and I can make it bigger. So now when I make these changes and click OK, you'll see that the text changes. So that might be able to make your document a little bit more interesting, or a little bit nicer, cleaner looking if you're doing a resume or you're turning in a paper for school, something like that. Okay, so that's, again, these things that we're doing here, you could do in any application. And that's why it's important to have this foundation. So the next thing we want to do is change something. So in this case, actually, let me back up 1 second. One thing I forgot to do is the delete. So if you want to delete something, again, highlight it, and you could either do Edit Cut in this case, or you can just hit the delete button, the delete key, and it'll get rid of it. And then I could type in, say, something like second. Okay, so that's how you can edit text. You select it and you delete it, and then you can change it, or you can just type right on over it. Okay, now let's look at finding, editing, and finding and replacing a word. So if I wanted to change the word this to here, what I could do is go up to Edit, and if I just wanted to find a word, I could just use the Find menu item here. If I want to replace something, then I choose that. Now sometimes if you choose Find, the replace and find functionality are built into the same window. In this case, you'd have to choose replace. So what do I want to find? I want to find this, and I want to replace it with here. Now I have the option to find it first. Okay, so it's expecting me to be at the very top. So now if I look for it, it finds it. Okay, now I have the option of finding the next one, or replacing it, or replacing all of them. So in this case, I'm going to find the next one, and then I'll replace this one. Okay, so once it gets to the end, it's basically searching from top down, and when it gets to the end, it can no longer find it. So if I hit Find Next again, it can't find it because I'm at the bottom of the screen. Okay. Now again, once you make your changes, always be sure to save. So File, Save. And one thing I wanted to point out here is, as you've probably already noticed, there are some shortcut keys. There's Control N for a new document, Control O to open, Control S. I'll hit Save here just to save it, but you can see that under the Edit menu as well. Control Z for undoing, Control X to cut, Control C for copy, and you can read the rest. Now this is important because whether you're working in Windows or Linux, you can use these same shortcut keys and they would work. So a Control C in Windows is the same as Control C in Linux. Now if you're working on a Mac, the only difference is instead of using the Control key, you'd use the Command key, but it would still be Command C. So C for copy, X for cutting, V for pasting. So if you understand these a few shortcut keys, then you can use them in almost any operating system or any application that you're working on. This section simply provides a list of different text editors, and it's really just for your awareness. A lot of text editors are built into the operating system, but others you can download free from the internet. I'm sure there's more text editors out there, but these are a lot of common ones, and you'll see that they apply to Windows, Linux, and Mac. Now, text editors don't have a lot of functionality as compared to word processors, but they're very useful, especially when you're working with data, because word processors tend to include a lot of kind of hidden characters, things for formatting and functionality within a word processor, whereas a text editor is very basic and there's not a lot of hidden characters or formatting characters. So there is a need and a purpose for the text editor, even in its simplicity. It's still very useful, like I said, especially when you're working with data files such as CSV files.